It's a special mini episode today of the podcast focusing in on movies, in particular, one movie, Coco. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Hey there, thanks so much for joining me here on episode 34 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton, and today's focus is the new Disney-Pixar film, Coco, which came out recently over the Thanksgiving holiday, and I just caught up with my family on Friday, which is December 8th, and I mentioned that date because it's very important. I did not do this intentionally, but we saw it on the first day where you did not see Olaf's frozen adventure in front of Coco. So we saved ourselves 22 minutes or so of time by seeing it a day later than people that did not save that time on the 7th. It's interesting because I generally like when Disney puts short films in front of their movies. And I have not seen this film, obviously. What I've heard is that it's pretty bad, and the idea of Olaf singing for 20 minutes about the holidays sounds painful. I like Frozen, but it seemed a little weird to put something that long and that disconnected from the main event in front of this movie. So that is one thing we gained by not going. Of course, we still saw 20 minutes of previews and 25 minutes of commercials because we showed up a bit early. So if we had added in another 22 minutes, I think that my younger daughter is 4, would have been ready to go. But they did both enjoy it, so it all worked out very well. In general, I really like this movie. I didn't know much about it going in. I had watched the preview once or twice beforehand, but I had purposely not read that much because I've found that you can easily, especially with movies from big companies like Disney, you can easily learn so much about who the voices are, who's directing it, everything about the story, even some issues which if movies are delayed. None of those things are things I really want to know anymore. I just like to go into the movie mostly cold. I know enough to know it's an interesting movie that I want to see. I read some critics' reviews, but not that closely until I've seen the film. And that was the case with Coco. I went in about as cold as I have into any movie recently, and I think that was only a benefit. It was a stunning movie. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into just some general thoughts, of course, about the movie and what it is. In case you're one of the few who don't know that much about it, I suspect a lot of you have already seen it. And then I'm just going to go through some of my thoughts, what I really liked, things that maybe didn't work out as well, some of my favorite scenes, just my general thoughts about the movie. I haven't done this before on this podcast, but I do see a lot of movies. I used to write a movie blog at ptsnob.com, so I would not call myself a film critic or anything like that. I once had aspirations to do that. This is going to stay pretty basic, though. I'm not going into super specifics, but I really love talking about movies. So I figured since I have this podcast and I'm a big fan of Coco, why not sit down and talk about it? And that's what I'm going to do now. Well, let's start out with just some basic information about Coco in case you're not familiar, and it also kind of helps to set the framework for what the movie is. It has 2 co-directors, Lee Unkrich, who is a fairly familiar name through his work as director of Toy Story 3, and then he also was co-director on Finding Nemo and Monsters, Inc. and Toy Story 2. So some of the really big Pixar movies that have done very well and connected with people he's been involved with. His co-director is Adrian Molina, who's newer to Pixar. He does have a writing credit on The Good Dinosaur and as a story artist on Monsters University. The basic plot is there's a boy named Miguel who wants to be a musician, but unfortunately music is banned in his family due to a long-lost descendant, his great-great-grandfather, who left the family to go pursue a career in music. Now, he goes in search of this guy and eventually accidentally stumbles into the land of the dead, as people sometimes do, and comes into contact with a lot of members of his family who have now deceased. He's trying to get back to the reality, but also wants to meet up with his great-great-grandfather, who believes is this really famous Mexican singer named Ernesto de la Cruz. So it's an adventure story with a little bit of like a Back to the Future thrown in, where he has to get back before he gets stuck forever. It's also meeting family members from the past, and it's really clever. It's gorgeous, as you would expect from Pixar, but there's a lot more to it than just a pretty film with kind of a unique hook on an adventure story. And what I really loved about it is how much it sneaks up on you emotionally. And this is totally going to depend on where you are in life, because 24-year-old Dan would not have had the same reaction as 41-year-old father of two Dan, who has two girls. There's particular scenes near the end when revelations come out that resonate really strongly, including a scene with a dad singing to his daughter, who seems to be a similar age, possibly a little younger than my daughter, who's 4.5. I admit, tears were flowing there for a bit. There are scenes that you don't realize how much they're connecting, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, they've got me. Pixar, you've got me. That song, which is called Remember Me, and I suspect will have a very good chance to win an Oscar this year, resonates again when we have an older character, actually the title character, Coco, singing it later. And I don't want to give too much away, but that scene also really got me. It takes a lot. I'm a bit of I wouldn't say cynical, but I can be a fairly skeptical movie watcher. So I'm not somebody who's immediately crying every time I see a movie. Yes, the beginning scene of Up did that. There's moments in whether Disney movies or others that will really connect with me, but I can't remember seeing a movie in the theater and being that emotionally drawn in, especially with a movie that doesn't seem that way in the beginning. In the beginning, you're more following it like, oh, this is a fun jaunt into a cool world, the land of the dead, with a boy that we like. Then all of a sudden you get to the end, and you're like, wow, they really surprised me with what they did there. And there's even some revelations in the plot that, yes, when I look back, I think, of course, that's how it was going to be. Of course, the way that it looked in terms of his family was not the exact way it was going to be. Yet, it doesn't ruin it. That's a real skill. Because, a movie like Cars 3, for example, I enjoyed Cars 3, but you saw the twist coming a mile away. It didn't make it a bad movie, but there's always the sense where, okay, it's the Rocky 3 story. I kind of see where it's going here. That wasn't the case with Coco. Even when the plot hit beats that you would expect, it was done so convincingly that it still worked for me. There's several big themes in the movie. There's obviously the strong message of you need to listen to your talent. You need to listen to what your heart wants. That whole idea of, find a job that you love and do it for the rest of your life. And that's really connects, obviously, with someone like me who's doing this podcast or trying to write. And that may not be my full-time job, but it's easy to see something of that in a character like Miguel, who's so into music yet isn't able to do it. And I don't have restrictions like that in my life, so I don't want to make myself sound similar. Anyone who's like an artist or is even trying to do some sort of creative pursuit, that's a strong theme that is very common in a movie like this. But an equally strong theme in the movie is staying connected with family across generations, even after they die. Don't forget your grandparents or great-grandparents or the stories of your parents when they were younger. And this is the message that I think really is going to resonate stronger with people that are either my age or older, and makes Coco, in a way, I hate to just categorize any movie as a kid's movie or not a kid's movie, and Pixar has done this for so many times. Like Ratatouille is the same way. There are things with the critic and with the way that you're looking at life that are beyond anything that a kid may grasp right away. That's similar here, where the movie on its own is a really strong movie for kids. It's not a laugh out loud, laugh a minute show, but my girls both liked it and were engaged by it. But there's another undercurrent to this movie in terms of family and the strength and connections among family, and even accepting people in your family who might not do what you want them to do. They might play music when your family, for good reasons, doesn't want them to. But that doesn't mean the people that don't want them to are bad people. Everyone is coming from their own point of view, and yet they're still a family, and that really rings true in this movie. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm a dad of 2 girls who are 8.5 and 4.5. My perspective makes a film like Coco resonate much stronger than something like Cars 3 or Finding Dory in a sense, or possibly The Incredibles 2 next year, though I obviously have only seen a short preview. Something about the way they handle death, the way they handle connections among family members, and everything surrounding it, the reverence for it, yet the sadness that goes to it, really works in Coco. I also want to mention the gorgeous visual effects. It's no surprise that a Pixar movie looks great. The scenes even in Mexico at the start of the movie have that interesting, it's animated, but it almost looks photorealistic approach that also was very good in Cars 3 and has just gotten better and better as they moved along. But when you enter the land of the dead, it's stunning. That first reveal when he walks over the bridge is breathtaking, especially on the big screen. I did not see it in 3D. It's interesting to note that there aren't that many screens, at least in my area, that are showing it in 3D. It's very much skewed the other way, where most theaters are showing it in 2D and then in 3D for one showing. I wonder if that's a trend or it could relate to what else is out at this point. It's hard to say for sure. It also might be the fact that we're in the, several weeks into the run. It might have been different earlier. But regardless, it's a very impressive looking film, and not just in the typical way where you look at it and go, wow, that's pretty. The world feels real. You have these clever touches in the Land of the Dead where they use walkie-talkies or they use a Mac Classic at the administrative office. Things that are kind of, I hate to say dead, but older technologies. There's a lot of fun touches. There's plenty of little in-jokes and characters. The Pizza Planet van comes around at one point. There's some cool sight gags with the bones. So I'm glad those actually were not that prevalent, because seeing a preview, it looked like there was going to be a lot more kind of goofy, oh, they're dead, they've got, the bones are flopping around jokes. But that didn't really happen that much. And while that might have drawn some more laughs from the kids, I appreciated it because it made the movie overall just feel more creative and original. And I like that when you have a movie that could easily have gone for the lowest common denominator, and it rarely does. There's some jokes, like when you have all these dead bodies. I hate to say dead bodies because they are actual characters, but you have characters that are made out of bones. You have to make some jokes that way, with heads falling off and various things. But I didn't find it distracting where I thought, oh my gosh, this whole movie is just jokes like that. It was intermittent enough where it wasn't a big deal. I also think that in general, Coco also does a great job in presenting the Mexican culture in a way that, to me, seems respectful, yet down to earth. It's not a case where they're going, look at us, look what we're doing, we're so forward thinking. No, it's understated. It's similar to the way that Moana was done. You do a real story with real characters and show their motivations and everything. That's all you really have to do. And it's no coincidence that Coco is the highest grossing film of all time in Mexico, past The Avengers recently. Everything seems natural. The score from Michael Giacchino, the score just works. It doesn't feel forced. Yes, there's the typical kind of Mexican music that you would hear. Actually, to say it, in Epcot is where it kind of makes me think of, especially El Rio del Tiempo and a bit of the Gran Fiesta Tour. But it doesn't feel like the cliched, oh, we're going to play the most obvious things. You can tell they did a lot of research to come up with this story. And Dia de Muertos doesn't get shown as kind of a silly, superstitious approach or something. We go, oh, look at that goofy thing they do. No, it's presented in a respectful way of families to connect with each other while honoring their ancestors. I was impressed by what Disney was able to do without overselling it. Just presenting an interesting story that also looked at a different culture. The cast is entirely an all Latino cast, if you don't count John Ratzenberger's cameo. And that should not be glossed over. That's a really big deal. And hopefully it'll be less of a big deal as we go along. But I really appreciate the fact that Pixar is going this route in showing different stories and not the most obvious stories that play straight down the middle. Should also talk about the songs. I mentioned Remember Me, which was written by Robert Lopez and Kristen Anderson Lopez, who did Let It Go. Also songs from Winnie the Pooh. That song, like I said earlier, I think is going to win the Oscar. There's also more upbeat songs that work well. The performance, when Miguel performs Poco Loco in a talent contest, is a really fun moment. A lot of upbeat music throughout that I can't wait to hear the soundtrack, and not just for the big show-stopping number, more for just the entire vibe of the movie. Really fits well with everything that the vibe of the movie. The music just helps to create a great environment and one that's believable, yet also fun and vibrant. And it's a world that I want to spend more time in and don't feel like I'm tired of it by the end of the movie. Also, definitely want to go into a little more detail about the voice acting. Miguel is voiced by Anthony Gonzalez. I am not familiar with him. He's a boy who had one-off roles in shows like The Bridge and Criminal Minds, but he's basically an unknown. And that's exciting too, because you're never looking at him going, oh, that's someone I recognize. You look at him like, that's Miguel. And that's really important to the story. There's really only a few recognizable names. Gael Garcia Bernal plays the character of Hector, who Miguel meets, and kind of an offbeat guy who seems like a trickster, but ends up really helping him down the way. Benjamin Bratt voices Ernesto de la Cruz, the famous singer, who also appears to be his great-great-grandfather, and does a nice job playing this guy who is really used to everyone saying how great he is through his songs and his movie appearances, and has a lot of fun playing that arrogant celebrity character. You also have some small roles from people like Cheech Marin, and I mentioned John Ratzenberger, and also Edward James Olmos, who plays a character named Chicharon, who only has a very small moment, but that's one of the most effective moments of the film. Basically, this character is a guy who's being forgotten. He died a long time ago. His family members don't remember him. He doesn't get to go visit his ancestors and kind of stay alive. So he's drifting off into this next world, whatever that can be. That scene was quite moving for a character you've just met to then experience what he's going through, that sense of loss. And we don't know where he's going now. It could be somewhere great, but regardless of what the next stage is, that loss of connection to anyone who's still alive really fits. There's a song that's played by Hector at that moment. That whole scene really is stuck with me from the movie. I should also mention Alana Ubach, who plays Mama Imelda Rivera, who is Miguel's great-great-grandmother, and initially seems like an antagonist who's trying to kind of catch him and send him back to the real world, but turns out being a lot more than that. And her scene on stage in the end, she does a great job with the voice acting for that and makes us care a lot about that character. I'm not familiar with her work in the past, but her voice work is excellent and really makes that character a lot bigger than she would have been. So I want to talk a bit about what could lead to an attraction in Epcot. I think it could be something really cool. We've heard a lot of information about the chance that a Coco attraction could replace the Gran Fiesta Tour in Epcot. And I have not read up yet on what that could be. I assume that it would not be a complete replacement. They would still use the boat ride, from what I've heard. And it would be significant, though not as significant as Maelstrom to Frozen, but likely more significant than El Rio del Tiempo to the Gran Fiesta Tour. So my thought is, it's really easy what they could do. You could do a boat ride through the land of the dead, not a book report of the film. Instead, taking a journey, like we are getting to go somehow similar to how Miguel does, but not in the same way. And on the way, we'll meet some of the characters from the movie. And there could even be, a song at the end. You have the performance spot at the Gran Fiesta Tour now with the Three Caballeros. They could perform something upbeat. I don't know if Remember Me is the right choice in that spot. But my hope, though, if they do that, is that they really work to make it better. There are screens that they could swap out various things with these characters instead of Donald. I hope there's a lot more that could go into it. I'm not expecting a $200 million renovation, but if you are going to put Coco in the Mexico Pavilion, to take the time to make an attraction there, let's make something really cool. Let's not just kind of do the bare bones overlay. Let's really go and create something that is more popular. Now, the only downside, if it is popular, which I assume it would be, they would likely need a bigger queue. So that the marketplace would unlikely to stay in the same way as it is now. I assume they would keep the restaurant obviously there, but that pavilion might seem very different. And I know generally I'm very opposed to IP at World Showcase. In this particular case, I think it would be a net positive to go from the Gran Fiesta Tour, which is fun. My girls love it. But to a Coco attraction, if it's done well, and I know the Imagineers have that ability, they could create something that fits better in Mexico, still connected to an IP, but is not feel out of place. And it's already set up well. They could really create something memorable that only makes the film more popular. And given how much I like the film, that's a great thing. Now, I hope if Disney does this, that they act soon, because you had a case with Inside Out where I felt like there was an opportunity for them to do something either in the Imagination Pavilion or even with the film. Not that I wanted to see Figment go away, but they had an opportunity to jump on that and create something while the momentum of that movie was there. I'm not sure the momentum of that movie is there as much. I know they're supposed to create an attraction for it in California Adventure. I hope that if they decide to do an attraction for Coco, that they make this announcement like in the next few months and they try to build it within the next year or two. Because you go too far down the road, people aren't going to remember as well. And I know that obviously they're adding a Ratatouille attraction in Epcot now, and people remember. They're not going to forget this movie exists. But my thought is, the chance for a really great top-notch Coco attraction that guests are most into comes within a window of the next year or two. So I want to talk a bit about how it's done at the box office. It's been number one now for 3 weeks, like I mentioned earlier. However, I don't expect that Coco is not going to make the money on the level of Finding Dory or The Incredibles 2 or obviously Toy Story 4 that are coming down the way. That's okay. And I know it's odd because, Disney is trying to make as much as they possibly can. But it's important for Pixar not to always go for the easiest dollar. I can already sense with Pixar, after Finding Dory and Cars 3, and even The Good Dinosaur, most people did not like very much. So you have the sense that they've kind of been dipping for a while. I feel like Coco is up there with some of their best work. It may be my favorite movie. It's at least my favorite since Inside Out. It may be my favorite Pixar movie further back than that. We may be going back towards like Up or WALL-E, Ratatouille, back that far. Toy Story 3 was also very good, so I don't want to gloss over it. But just as an example of where it stands, I feel like quality-wise, this is up there with the best work they've done in the past, 7, 8, 9 years. I would hope that the fact that it's made a lot of money and done really well worldwide, it's over like $300 million already worldwide. It's going to do more. It'll do well on home video. It may not make $1 billion, but it's important for Pixar's brand. Pixar's next two movies are both sequels. So they are not going to have another film that's not a sequel until at least 2020. And Disney also with the Frozen sequel coming up is not really doing that either. And plus they're doing their live action remakes of things like The Lion King and Mulan. There's a lot of retreads going on. So Coco is important as kind of a signifier of Disney, or especially Pixar. We can do original movies that are unique and amazing, and they still make money. They may not make as much, but they will still do well at the box office. And that's great. So I know this isn't such a mini episode as I anticipated, but I really liked this movie. And I hope that if you haven't seen it yet, maybe hearing this might encourage you to go see it in the theaters, or to at least keep it on your list as something to buy or rent when it comes out down the road in 2018. Just to close out, I wanted to reiterate a point that I made earlier. It's a pretty tough time here in the United States. I'm not going to get into specific politics. I don't do that on the show. However, there are challenges right now in terms of how leaders and others are treating, people of color or women. To me, that makes it even more essential to have works of art, including films, that celebrate diversity and tell a real story that's uplifting, not in a way that's cheap or ham-handed, but uplifting by showing fully fledged characters. They have universal goals, and they're Mexican. That's great. There's a lot of rhetoric that's out there right now that is not productive. I call this website and this podcast the Tomorrow Society, and it mostly refers to my connection to Epcot Center and even Walt's dream of Epcot. But another part of it is looking towards the future and saying, I want a better future. This future that we dream about with this amazing technology should also be a place where people can get along well of all different cultures. And it's not a place where you're treated terribly or your government isn't behind you if you're not a certain skin color or gender. I don't mean to go overboard with the significance of Coco, but it really struck me in seeing this movie and just how well it's done. And I look at it as we need some great, positive, fun movies in our life right now. And Coco really resonated with me in that way. And whenever I see a movie like this, there's been a lot of them this year that are just human and good movies that also are original and creative. Gives me a lot of hope for where we're heading. If you have any thoughts about this particular episode or the podcast in general, you can email me, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. You can also connect with me on Twitter @TomorrowSOC or on Facebook or Instagram @TomorrowSociety. If you like this podcast, I'd love it if you could rate or review it. You can do so on iTunes through tomorrowsociety.com/subscribe. And of course, I always have blog posts and other articles going up at tomorrowsociety.com if you want to check those out. The music for this podcast is written by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. I've got several interviews coming up in the next few weeks you should definitely look out for. I think you're going to like them. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back talking to you again really soon.